Good to see everybody here. Looking forward to catching up with people after the service over a cuppa. But just to let you know, Mark talked about change to start with. Did you notice that? I don't like change. I find change really difficult. And next week, after 22 years of living with us, our son Matt is moving out. This is why I brought the tissues, just in case. I've always said that living with my son Matt is like living with a circus. This is the one who secretly put confetti on the top of our fan blades and then waited patiently for weeks before we turned them on. Ambushed me regularly with Nerf guns. It's just a thing. Frequently waited silently on the other side of the door, holding the dog out so that when I opened the door, there was the dog. Got as excited as I was to see how many days it takes a dead jellyfish to evaporate in the sun. And when he needed his 100 hours of driving to get his licence, he and I did a road trip to Nimbin, just so he could go back to his class and tell his friends that he'd driven to Nimbin for some brownies. And now there are boxes stacked up against the wall, and the Nerf guns are packed away in there, and the wardrobe is empty, and his room is tidier than I've ever seen it. You can actually see the floor. And it's so sad. And I confess that I've been crying in the shower most mornings this week. I'm not often this vulnerable, am I? The thing is, I'm happy that I'm sad. Because I know I'm sad because we have a really good relationship, and that's why I'm really going to miss him. I'd be sad if I was happy because that might mean that things had gone wrong between us. And I know it's a really good thing that he's moving out. He's got a good job, he's finding his feet in the world, and frankly, it will be nice for Drew and I to have the house back to ourselves after 26 years. We both know how to turn all the lights out when we go to bed. We also know how to put dishes in the dishwasher. So, there are silver linings. But I know that the transition's going to be hard. It just takes me a while. It's who I am. It takes me a while to let go and move on. I find change difficult. Not everybody does. I asked Kevin, don't know if you're watching Kevin, but I asked Kevin what he thought about change this week, and he said, change? I love change. Change is good. It's here to stay. Which reminded me of a quote by Brian McLaren, who said, I used to think that things were real and change was something that happened to them over time. But now I think that change is real and things are events that happen over time. Change is the constant, and things come and go, appear and disappear, form and fade away. This quote has been floating around in my head for about 6 months. I don't know why, but I can't let it go. And the more I think about it, the more I see the reality to that. McLaren explains this by talking about standing in a river when he was fly fishing. He says, I look upstream to where fast-flowing water meets still water. Apparently this is called a seam in fly fishing language. He goes on, what is that seam? It's not a set of atoms, because every second, one set of atoms is replaced by new ones. If we suddenly froze the stream to stop the atoms from moving, to capture that same, as in the photograph, the seam would no longer exist, right? That's because the seam isn't a fixed and static thing. It's a pattern of things. It's a relation, it's a flow of things. It's temporary, it's contingent, it's more of an event than a thing. I look upstream and I see a hump of water in front of a rock, another pattern or event. I see the stream itself, also an event. I look at the round rocks beneath my feet. Before the stream smoothed them, they were jagged. They were jagged boulders on a mountain. And before that, they were bedrock under the mountain. And before that, fluid magma deep beneath the earth. And before that, space dust drawn into orbit around the sun. What I see as solid, round rock is just one event in a long, long story. Then I look down to see my reflection in the water, and behold, I realise I too am an event, a flow, a pattern of relationships. Which brings us back to the quote. I used to think that things were real and change was something that happened to them over time. But now I think that change is real and things are events that happen over time. Change is the constant and things come and go, appear and disappear, form and fade away. As I was going through the wisdom series and I got to Ecclesiastes, this quote kept on buzzing around in my head. And this week I've been thinking about MCC and the changes that MCC has faced in the past few years. It was COVID. A lot of things changed during COVID. There was so much upheaval. And it was before my time at MCC, but I know that MCC live streamed. That's when MCC started live streaming, am I right? Yeah. And the congregation didn't meet for a long time. People got out of habits. People lost connection with each other in spite of the very best efforts. Some people disappeared altogether. But then new people found us. And live streaming turned out to be a way of people testing the water. They can check us out online for a while before deciding to show up in person. And I've heard that again and again. Some people watch for 6 months and then finally come. So, that change, unintended consequence, I guess, it's been really helpful for a lot of people. Those who were here before the pandemic probably think things like, before COVID, MCC used to do things like this, or used to be like this. A few people have told me how much they miss the way that communion happened before COVID. You'd go to someone who would serve you communion. So there were 2 people out the front, am I right in this? 2 people out the front, and acolytes, and people would come and be served communion from those people. And then somebody would pray for you personally, if that's what you wanted. And it was a really important part of the service for several people. Of course, for new people who have come to this church since COVID, it's always been like this. We've got these 2 tables and there's juice and crackers on them. And if we changed now to the format of having people out the front serving communion and praying for people, it would be how it used to be for some, and it would be oh, this is a new way of doing this for others. As humans, we have a tendency to think that the way it was is how it always was. But of course, it wasn't. I asked Tracy for her memories of MCC because Tracy started coming to MCC in the year 2000. That's when MCC met in the Quaker Meeting House at Kelvin Grove. And they were trialling a monthly service with contemporary music. They used to sing a lot of songs that were specifically written for MCC congregations. Every song, every Bible reading used inclusive language without exception. Back then there were church barbecues on most public holidays. And those are the things that brought people together and helped people get to know each other. And MCC became a really close community. Christmas was a really special time back then. The pastors put on Christmas lunch because there were so many people in the congregation who had nowhere to go because they'd been rejected by their families. When the church moved to New Farm, it grew fairly quickly from about 12 to 15 people maybe to about 30 plus. The new people didn't know the MCC songs and they found them somewhat hard to learn and a little bit slow. And so Tracy, being in charge of the music, decided that the music needed to reflect the needs of the current members and let go of the older songs. And Tracy said, that was a hard decision. And when things changed so quickly, sometimes it felt like MCC's history didn't really matter. She loves that the church grew, and she loves that it's still growing. Tracy has seen a lot of change, but one thing she said that hasn't changed is that MCC is affirming, it's accepting, and it's inclusive. And those words kept on coming up over and over this week. The more people I asked about what's changed and what stayed the same at MCC. Kevin said that what's important is that MCC is an open and accepting church, and apart from that, he doesn't care whatever we do. Everything else is up for debate and change. Megan said that what is unique about our church is that it's a church that's radically accepting. She said there are no judgments about our past, our sexuality, our race, our religious experience. Scott said the one thing that shouldn't change is our openness and acceptance of every letter of L, G, B, T, I, Q, A plus. Margaret said the uniqueness of MCC is in its acceptance. People, anyone can come and worship God. There's no judgment, all are made welcome. And Margaret talked about how persistent people were in caring for her and Christine when they were newcomers. She said there was a group of people who came and talked to them week after week after week, and she couldn't understand why these younger people wanted to spend all this time with them. Mark mentioned the diversity of denominational traditions that we have here. He also mentioned our willingness to reach out, and he also said that MCC is ridiculously sexually inclusive. So we can see there's a common theme there. It seems like something worth clinging onto, even as we change, is some of those characteristics. Radically accepting. When I think about those words, I think of Jesus. Radically accepting. And it sounds to me a lot like the heart of the gospel. God radically accepts and includes me so that I can radically accept and include others. One person said they were so encouraged by seeing the younger people stepping up into responsibility and leadership. That same person also confessed to feeling a bit left behind and realising that their role in the church is changing as the church grows. Change is hard. Even when it's positive change, it's hard. For most people, change feels like a loss before it feels like a gain. Change involves grief because we have to get used to a new situation. And before we get into new habits and new routines and things start to feel normal again, and just as we've gotten to that point, things change again. Change is constant. Our congregation is changing. It's growing in numbers, which is quite remarkable since most churches are finding it really difficult to find their feet in this almost post-COVID world. If we weren't diverse enough already, we're diversifying even more. I'm not talking about the stock market. We've got more younger people. We've got straight parents of queer teenagers and adult children. We've got more people who identify as non-binary. We've got a growing group of neurodiverse people. No one would say that these changes are bad. Of course not. But change is hard. And the emotions that go along with change are complex. So I just want to acknowledge that today. I think it's important to say it out loud. Our church is changing, and change is hard. Our church is changing, and some people are going to find that more difficult than others simply because of who we are. It's not because they're inflexible or stuck in the past. It's because they loved what MCC has been. What MCC was mattered to them. Our church is changing, and people need space to grieve the change. It feels like a loss before it feels like a gain. Our church is changing, and we need space to remember together and celebrate what was good about MCC and still is, and what was good about MCC and has been lost because of time and changing circumstances and changing society. There are things, I think, that we've lost. We're at the point where not everybody knows everyone. That's a change. And so smaller friendship groups are naturally developing, and that can feel cliquey. And part of that is just inevitable with a larger group. It's impossible for the congregation to operate as one large group all of the time. But remember inclusiveness? Remember that word just kept on coming up with all of those people that I talked to during the week. If inclusiveness is one of the things worth holding on to, then let's think about how we can support those smaller groups to keep looking outwards and be open to others, even as people find closer relationships in smaller groups. And as the congregation becomes even more diverse, it becomes harder for different groups to understand and relate to one another. I'm going to confess here. Remember that apologetic sermon that I did? The first week I was here, I did an apologetic sermon. I said, I'm going to apologise for all of the stupid things that I will probably do. I'm going to confess to a rookie error that I made in the first few months that I was here. Because as most of you know, I'm from a straight world. And I had very few rainbow friends just a little over a year ago. I just don't know how this happened. But I remember in those first few weeks at MCC, I just lumped everybody into the same category. LGBT. LGBT. I was pastoring an LGBT church. Everyone was LGBT. And then somebody who was gay said to me one day, I don't understand trans. And it dawned on me, oh, everybody is not LGBT. Everybody is uniquely different. Everybody is themselves. And just because you are part of a LGBT church, it doesn't automatically mean that you understand all the letters. Why would we expect a gay person to understand what it's like to be trans? Or a trans person to know what it's like to be bi? Or ace? Why would we assume that someone who's ace knows what it's like to be non-binary? Or what it's like to be a straight parent of a gender-diverse child? But if radical acceptance is worth holding on to, then let's think about how we can more deeply understand each other. As the congregation becomes wider in its age groups, it gets harder to run activities that suit everyone. The same applies when it comes to neurodiversity and to differently abled people. And as MCC gets more diverse in terms of religious traditions, it gets harder to find the balance of music and worship styles that is going to suit everyone. But if being welcoming to all is worth holding on to, if not judging one another is worth holding on to, then let's think about how we can accommodate those differences too. I personally think that there are exciting times ahead for MCC Brisbane. But we're going to have to be patient with one another. We're a mostly volunteer-led congregation. We're probably going to make a lot of mistakes. We're going to have to show an enormous amount of grace towards each other. We'll have to love even when we don't understand. We're going to have to forgive each other a lot. But I think we'll be okay because we know someone who has gone before us, who knows our weaknesses and loves us anyway. We know someone who knows how to include people and radically accept them. We know someone who took on skin and bones and flesh and died for us. And I reckon if we just follow him, then we'll figure it out as we go. And I didn't warn Matthew, forgive me, but I'm going to go straight to our table. We've got a radically inclusive table at MCC. I didn't need the tissues so far, maybe I'll take